Welcome to From Betrayal to Breakthrough. I'm Dr. Debbie Silber, and today's guest is Dr. Brian Russell. Brian Russell is an author, professor, podcaster, and a transformational coach for spiritually minded professionals. His personal mission is to seek out, study, and embody the deepest truths so that he can share them compellingly, lovingly, and transformationally with others. He's the author of Centering Prayer. Sitting quietly in God's presence can change your life. He is also the host of the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. When you make the decision to become better, not bitter, your entire life can change. That's exactly what happened to my next guest, Dr. Brian Russell. He's going to share his story of breakdown to breakthrough so you can do it too. Here's Brian. Okay, everybody, we're with Dr. Brian Russell today, and it's a bit of a spin on betrayal. He's going to be sharing a betrayal story. Of course, all the great things it led to. We're going to be talking about healing from fear, guilt, and shame through silent meditative prayer and journaling. You know, I'm a big advocate on whatever is the right fit for you to get you through your times and your hard times, and I have a feeling this is going to be a wonderful new resource for you. So welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Debbie. It's so great to be here.
Thank you. So, of course, my audience wants to know, before we get started, for you to have these tools in your toolkit, something probably happened that led for you to have this search that you needed to heal. Can you share parts of your story?
Yeah, absolutely. Essentially, in 2010, I had been married for 20 years. I've been a fully tenured professor. Things are going well with my career. And I had two young children. They were, they were 9 and 10. And when everything kind of kicked up, and my former wife, and again, I'm not going to say bad stuff about her, but essentially decided that she didn't want to be married to me anymore, and took off, literally left the state, and I found myself with two young children who, again, their mom helped some, but it was the majority of the responsibility has been on me since that time. And they're grown up now and they're doing pretty well. And then, I was worried I was going to lose my job. The financial catastrophe of what of a divorce actually tends to be, and it wasn't in my case. And then just the fear that my whole life, I was going to lose everything that I worked for. And so that's kind of the backdrop. And, so that whole betrayal story is what launched for me this really remarkable last 10 years for me, which was growth and digging in deep. And, I had a mindset early on that I was going to be better, not bitter on the other side of this thing. And I'm really grateful that I was able to grab a hold of that, but it was a really painful, at least a year or so. And then even the comeback was painful at times too. But, now I look back 10 years and it was a remarkable journey.
Right. And before we get to where you are now, tell us how, because we know betrayal affects us physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually. Do you remember some of the symptoms you had, the physical, the mental, the emotional?
Yeah, I was a complete disaster at some real level. I mean, I'm a pastor, and I work at a seminary, so I train pastors, and so I have I understand what pastoral care is, and even I'm not a trained counselor, but I had enough to be a pastor. So I literally knew kind of what was going to happen to me, but it's a totally different deal actually watching yourself run through a grief spiral. And for me, I was completely anxious, and I'll come back to that in just a second. I mean, like, I talk fast anyway, but I was really whipping through some words back in those days. Completely just obsessed with, worry. I went through a really difficult 10 weeks of flat out insomnia right after we signed the papers, did the mediation hearings and stuff. And so I couldn't sleep. Just worried that I was going to lose my job just because of what my vocation was. The finances. So I had real financial issues too, because obviously there was some alimony was involved in this whole thing, and we had financial problems even in our marriage. So it's like I was one of those persons that's I made too much money to file for bankruptcy, but I was still. I had to work like 2 or 3 extra jobs. So I had a million symptoms. So I consider myself almost just a train wreck. And on top of that, being a person of faith, I felt like I completely lost my faith. Like I lost all ability to feel any kind of spiritual God, like at least I had previously. So that was probably the hardest part for me, was that the thing that had been an anchor for most of my life. So I was 41 and I grew up in church. And so, I'd been pastor, called to ministry, all this stuff. And all of a sudden, bam, that one resource that I had counted on so much for most of my life, just completely empty on the inside. So I don't know if that's enough detail for you.
Yeah, it's, well, first of all, those physical symptoms, the anxiety, the worry, the insomnia, that is so classic. I mean, we've had easily over 25,000 people take our post-betrayal syndrome quiz. And these are things we see every single day. And it's like that shock and that trauma can't help but ignite that stress response and lead to those symptoms, issues, conditions. And then on top of it, here you are. So think about it, if you're exhausted and you're trying to raise your kids and you're trying to manage your work and you're feeling these financial issues, it's like this big one ugly spiral. So it makes total sense why you were feeling the way that you were. But let's talk about that feeling of being disconnected. It's interesting because in the study that I did, everyone eventually moved towards the spirit. If they weren't religious or spiritual, they moved towards the spiritual side of their religion or just spirituality in general, because they felt this deep sense of disconnection.
Yeah.
And at a time where we need to feel connection, we just feel so disconnected. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. Because I have a doctorate in biblical studies, so I've been, I teach biblical, so I'm like a Bible expert, and so literally, what this whole thing felt like for me was all of the resources that I had access to, just traditional prayer, going to church, reading the Bible. I'd been doing that my whole life, and so in a sense, none of that stuff worked for me at all. So I couldn't simply like, hey, I'm just going to do more of what I've always done, because I was all in already. And it was, I basically, my spiritual struggle was that the very things that had taken me to where I was, which was, as far as I knew, I was fully into to my Christian faith. At some level, I felt betrayed. I guess I have to say, at some level, I felt betrayed by God, even as more so than my former spouse. And so that put me in a really difficult place where I'm trying to stand up in class and teach people how to be pastors. And I'm just seared on the inside and wondering, like, at some point, it got bad enough for me on the spiritual stuff as I pondered, wow, I'm 41. If this never comes back on for me, can I fake it for the rest of my life? And that's what was going through my head back there too. So it was pretty intense.
Yeah. So what'd you do? Because here, this was what you moved towards to give you a sense of safety, security, connection, all of that. And it was just, so then it was that leaving of it and just, I imagine you felt kind of lost. So it's like, wait a second, what do I do now?
No, that's exactly what it was like. And so at some level, we'll get to the looking back, but I would say in a real sense, the God that I knew died, and I'm not going to say that it ever came back to life either. I think I've experienced a more profound version of God, and basically, and this is where I can tell the story. I've had several mystical experiences. I'm just going to share one, but this was like a transformational moment looking back. At the time, I knew it was important, but this was right in the middle of the darkest times, and so it wasn't like I bounced instantly, but I had a good friend that I did speak with. And again, I always talk fast, but I was on the phone, and my friend said, "Brian, you sound like you're losing your mind. You're just talking in loops." And I'm like, "Oh, geez," and I'm like, "Okay, I probably am losing my mind literally, because I can't sleep. I'm super scared and the whole thing." And so what I did, I live in Orlando, and it's nice in Orlando. It was in the spring, so it wasn't even hot yet. It was just sunny, so it's just beautiful. So I go for a walk on this spring day. So this was probably April. This is really close to when the divorce papers would have got signed. So like April 2011. And I go for this walk, and I'd walked these sidewalks for years because I'd been living in the same place for 10 years. So I'm out walking, but I didn't take an iPod. So I'm not listening to music. And most of my life, I lived it inside of my own head. I'm a professor. I get paid to think and stuff. And so I'm walking, but this day, for whatever reason, it was so powerful. I started hearing birds sing, which again, like, of course they've always been singing, but I actually noticed it. And I remember hearing a bird and I looked up and I looked at the tree and again, this sounds so simple, but I literally saw the bird. Everything froze in that moment. I saw leaves on the tree, started smelling flowers. And I just, maybe for first time ever, I just literally showed up and I was fully present in this moment. And I sensed, whether it was, I'm not going to say I heard God say this, so I'm not really claiming that, but I just really sensed an overwhelming amount of love, which is exactly what I needed because I was terrified. And I just felt completely loved in the split second. And I sort of had this sense that, that God, or I was hearing this message, there's enough, Brian, there's enough.
Yeah.
And I count that as my introduction to mystical contemplation. And so when I realized, like, wow, that everything froze, it's like, okay, I have to investigate ways to get this to repeat somehow. And that's when I started getting interested in, I would call them alternative spiritual practices, or maybe contemplative spiritual practices. And I started doing a certain kind of journaling that has some faith tradition built into it. And then I discovered silent meditative prayer, or just meditation, if you will. And again, these weren't quick fix things, but I embraced both of those. And then in the journaling was really important too, because I was able to track out how I was feeling on the inside. And so I just essentially opened myself up for growth, trusted that, there is going to be enough. And that was the moment that things kind of turned for me. So, and that's what my spirituality now is very much invested in, these silent and solitude practices, these contemplative spiritual practices that now sit on top of the old version of religion that I had, and have just helped me to expand a bigger picture of the divine, that God, well, most people know that God is love, but I actually have run into that, literally felt like I ran into a bank of love, and that I was 100% loved. And that's been the part that's healed me from this over the last decade. And I'm still a work in progress, of course.
And it's so amazing because there are so many people who have those transformative moments. They are the quickest moments in time, but you remember it forever. It is life-changing. So, it's those peak moments. Sure, there are the darkest moments, but those are the moments where all of a sudden the clarity and the peace and the trust comes in, and it's amazing. It sounds like that was the case. That was definitely the case for you, because you're right. The birds were probably singing every day, and there were the trees and there were the leaves and all of it, but you were ready to hear a very profound message on that day. And that was the change. So then what did it lead to for you? So you had this moment, and I'm just imagining, here you are, your head is in a million places, and all of a sudden you go out, you have this magical, mystical moment. What happened then?
Well, what happened then is I had decided, again, I was going to be better, not bitter. And so I sort of had this, again, I would call it a prayer, but I wrote it as an affirmation. I just wrote down, I open myself fully to God's love, and I asked that all of the inner darkness inside of me, if it would be revealed in the light, so that I could be healed. So I kind of had that intention that I set for the whole healing piece. And then I just started doing anything that would help me to feel better. And what I mean by that, I was looking for healthy things, right? So, I mean, obviously I could have instantly drank a beer or something and made myself, but I'm not talking about anything like that. But it was more like, I just started experimenting. So I learned more about how to do these meditative prayers. Hung around really good friends and started listening to really, good, excellent personal development teachers.
Like, give us an example.
Yeah, well, some of these are just names that, Tony Robbins, he was obvious because I knew who that was. Jim Rohn, especially, who was really old school. I really love Jim Rohn, Darren Hardy. I read Eckhart Tolle, like The Power of Now. I mean, again, I can just keep whipping through Gary Zukov, a lot of persons that show up on, like, say, the Oprah Winfrey Show. I ended up meeting my now wife a year or so after, and she introduced me to a lot of literature that I'd never read before. So I embraced a lot of that just because I was looking for ideas. Because what I realized previously, my Christian faith, though it's been wonderful, and this was my mistake, because I've realized there's more resources in Christianity than I ever imagined. But to me, it was always an intellectual problem to solve. instead of something to really embody and live out. And so what I basically did was started experimenting with really embodied practices and decided that I was never going to ask anybody to believe anything that I didn't personally practice 100%. And I just started living by this principle of skin in the game, and I'm going to test stuff out. And then what happened for me is this is really interesting is I had been a good professor up until that point. I'd even won Teacher of the Year when I was younger as a junior faculty member, but my teaching just got a gazillion times better. And I started slowly sharing more out of my own pain and asking different kinds of questions. And so I just started helping more and more people, again, not right off the bat. So, I was healing up for a couple of years. And what I found then, that led me into coaching. I started just mentoring students more, and then students were just eating this up, and then they're calling alums, and I started doing these coaching groups, and that got me, I found out, wow, I could even coach business people. Mm-hmm. And so the pain that I had and the tactics and techniques and the questions that I got from all the people that I was reading put me in a position where I could really help people out of my own pain if I just owned it. And so, and that ended up, all the way till a few years ago, I started writing this book basically about how the meditation had transformed me and what I learned about how it could be a tool that could help other people.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when you shared just even your list of where you started, the personal development experts, and in the beginning, it sounds very personal development, like, Tony Robbins and Darren Hardy. And then you move towards, someone like Eckhart Tolle and Gary Zukav. It becomes much more spiritual. And we see this so often. It's such an important part of healing.
Yes.
You may not be ready for it at first, but then as we notice, we're growing, we're changing, we're ready for that deep and profound connection. And we're ready to look at things from such a different vantage point that we couldn't before. And I remember, I think of Wayne Dyer, Dr. Wayne Dyer, who started, and if you think of his earliest books, right, like The Erroneous Zones and some of his earliest ones to the end, they were much more personal development-ish, and then moved towards completely, spirituality. And it's that progression and that growth and that change. It sounds like that's what you did.
Yeah, and I should have thrown Wayne Dyer in there too, because I completely forgot about that. And what was funny, I was just listening to one of his CDs over the weekend, because I was like, I need to go back and listen to Wayne Dyer after all these years. And so, but it is true. He was very helpful for me too. And I was catching him right when he was making the shift. He had that, even has that movie Ambition to Meaning. I ran into that around the same time. And he has that story about his own father. So yeah, that was another person, these stories. And I just found that that kind of thinking expanded my ideas about God, especially about having it more embodied, and just simple things like gratitude, which is such a simple piece, but one of the most powerful tools that, that a person can use. That came, I know when I couldn't sleep, I remember now Wayne Dyer even said, hey, say what you're grateful for before you go to sleep. And, so guess what? I'm like I said, I'll try anything because I can't sleep. And so that was one of the things that slowly helped me out of my insomnia, was just doing hardcore gratitude work.
Yeah. And he also, I learned from him, it's true. If you have 7-8 hours that you get to sleep, or 6, 7, 8 hours, what are you marinating on? What are you thinking right before you go to sleep? What are those thoughts? And, but now I also imagine, because here you were a man of faith, and now this spiritual twist comes around. How did you kind of reconcile with that? Because it's very different.
No. That's been one of the most difficult parts of my life. And honestly, because essentially I deconstructed in my faith. And for seasons, I wondered if I really still had faith. But I've had really good counsel. I have really wonderful friends and stuff. And they, and I would say, hey, I'm not even sure if I believe anymore. And some of my friends they would just say things like, Brian, you're just really honest. And you say stuff that nobody else says, but everybody has struggles. And so I had really good friends to say, you just don't, you don't need to give up the whole thing. And that's where I just went. That's where I discovered, and this comes out in my book on centering prayer, that Christianity actually has really deep roots in most of this stuff, but for various reasons, and that's a whole nother conversation, the church has lost some of these wonderful tools that it has developed for thousands of years. The church gets a bad name about a lot of stuff, but there's these wonderful, rich tools, and a lot of even modern personal development bases itself on these spiritual practices that have deep roots in different faith traditions, actually.
Yeah. And that's why I remember in my study, people also left that sort of the dogma side of
Yeah.
the religion
Yeah.
and moved towards the spiritual side, because that just didn't make as much sense as it did. And this is regardless of the religion. That just seemed like a consistent thing. And it's interesting. I even remember I was never really religious, but I started getting really spiritual. I mean, I started reading a lot of Wayne, Neil Donald Walsh,
Yeah.
and I mean, and it just absolutely changed everything for me, made total and complete sense. But it can be very scary to question things. You know, it's like we're taught a certain thing, we're supposed to just believe that, stop thinking, stop questioning. And when we do, you know, we open ourselves up to, uh-oh, this is unfamiliar, but it feels good, it feels right. What the heck do I do with this, and how do I deal with everything I've been doing up until now?
No, that's exactly right. At least the thing I'm grateful for that at least helped me in my particular faith tradition is I come out of the Methodist side of pieces, and essentially the high point of Methodism, which again most Methodists don't even know this, but you know I'm a professor, so I knew this, is that we John Wesley was the founder, had this wonderful dogmatic position, but he called it the highest form of religion. What they called it perfect love. That you 100% get to a point in your life where you're so surrendered that all your life is love, and that you love God, you love your neighbor, you love yourself. And, you know, and honestly, that's the God that I ran into that I probably never knew. So, you know, I always joke, and I used to think I was a lot holier than I am now, for sure. But what I do know 100% sure is I'm a lot more loving. And so that's given me that frame to basically, at least in my case, to stay within my Methodist roots, because I think I more understand the end game, which is endless growth into love for all eternity. And and that actually communicates pretty well with anybody when I talk about it like that.
Yeah, who doesn't want more of that? You know, think about it. It's just love and connection,
Yes.
and I think also when you travel that route, going, you know, in the road of personal development towards spirituality, whatever spirituality means for you, also less judgmental. You know, we
Yes.
become a little less judgmental, more understanding. What do you you know, as we wrap up, what do you want to make sure everyone knows?
Yeah, actually, what I would love that for everybody to know is that the ultimate truth in the universe is love. And again, I would call that a God, a personal God who's 100% love. And that love is waiting for us to open ourselves up fully to a deep cleansing that removes from us our fear, our guilt, our shame, the fact that there is enough in the world. That's that first message I got that dealt with my fear, that it's all about abundance, and that we don't have to, there is enough, that we can get past our guilt of I'm not doing enough, and I can get past the shame of I'm just simply not good enough, and instead live our lives as ambassadors of abundance out of the rootedness that we're loved, and that's apart from anything that we actually do. And so that would be the one thing that I would want for everybody that I meet, the people that I coach, and even those that read my book. My book on centering prayer essentially was really originally going to be called Centering Prayer and the Journey to Love, because the whole point of the book is to get us to that position where we can just open ourselves up fully to feel loved. And so that's what I would hope everybody gets out of it. Yeah.
And I always try to get into the minds of my listeners and viewers, and I'm imagining they're thinking, well, that sounds nice. I don't trust that. How do you trust that?
Yeah. 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 You trust it. Yeah, you know what? And I think that's a completely fair question. And if I go back 10 years ago, I have like serious religious BS detectors. And I don't believe a lot of stuff that I hear. Like I always thought of, like, for me as a theologian, I believe I stand between pure science and superstition, somewhere in the middle there. And there's a lot of superstition. There's a lot of folks that say none of that stuff's true, and they try to be completely empirical. But there's obviously this deep spirituality. So, you know what I would just say to folks? Try it and see if it actually works. Have some skin in the game. And the point, if you would learn how to do, like, say, one of these meditative practices, it is not going to fix your life in one day or in a week or in a month, but you're just going to have to open yourself up to the practice, and you'll know looking back what it actually did for you. So just be patient with yourself. Like, I can even say, like, one of the things I think, I had this physical, I lost 30 pounds in a month when all this stuff was going to me 10 years ago. And so, you know what I did? I decided, wow, look at me. I'm all skinny like I was in college again. And I'm like, so you know what I did? I became a vegan at that point, literally on the spot, because my life felt so bad. It was easy just to dump all the old food.
Yeah.
And I did that. I'm not eating that way now, but I did that for like 2 straight years. And so I would say sometimes when you're in the middle of a crisis, it's actually easier to try new stuff because your life kind of sucks anyway, just to be completely blunt. And if this might actually help you, so give it a shot and see if it works.
Well, and I have a bit of a different spin on it, but I love what you're saying. And it's there's been a complete and utter death and destruction of the old.
Yeah.
So anything goes. I mean, why not try that new thing and see if it's a fit for you and trust the message that you get? Try it long enough to know for sure. Give it enough, of an opportunity, because it may just be a wonderful fit for you as you rebuild from, the what's left of the rubble of what your experience gave to you.
Yeah, I love how you just said it. That was a lot better than me. So I'm going to remember that if anybody ever asks me that question again, because that was perfect. That was a very more positive version of what I was trying to say.
But I get it. Totally. It's the same thing. We're talking about the exact same thing. That's the time. It's all, it's all been blown up. Let's see what else we can create.
Yeah, that's a great, looking back, I mean, I love the way you just said that too, because that's what I can remember. Somehow, again, I wanted to be better, not bitter. I'm just so grateful that I got that mindset in my head. And then, like you said, you just got to be open because it's a whole new world. And you just have to, and that's what's the scary thing is, right, Debbie? It's like everything goes because you just lost essentially everything, it feels like. And so you just have to embrace new opportunities and see it might just change your life, right?
Absolutely. Death and rebirth, right? That rebirth doesn't happen unless there's the death of the old. Brian, where do we go to learn more about you and the wonderful work you do?
Yeah, well, if people are interested in the coaching stuff, they can go to drbrianrussellcoaching.com. If folks would really just love some information on the centering prayer about my book, I have a really easy website, centeringprayerbook.com, and it's a landing page. You give me your email, you'll see a picture of my book and stuff, and I'll send you some resources on the book and how to start a centering prayer practice yourself. And then obviously people can find me on social media, and I can send those links to you. But I'm a little bit of I'm here, there, and everywhere. So
great, and we'll have everything in the show notes. Brian, I want to thank you so much. There are so many people watching and listening who are just unsure about their next step. They're untrusting with good reason. They've been burned by the person they trusted the most. So this is a wonderful opportunity to just explore what is readily available to us. And when we do, and when we embrace it, we can transform. You're living proof. So it's wonderful for you to share your insights with all of us today. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Debbie. It's so grateful here. And thanks to the audience, and I encourage everybody, there's blue sky on the other side of the clouds. So just keep moving.
There's so much incentive to move forward when we see how our crisis is impacting our health, our kids, our finances, and more. That's when Dr. Brian set out on a new path to question his beliefs and embrace new beliefs that served him so much better. Stay in touch with Brian by going to drbrianrussellcoaching.com, and we'll have all of his information in the show notes at thepbtinstitute.com/podcast. Here's my biggest takeaway. With the incentive to heal after being, as Brian said, seared on the inside, he set out to find the tools and resources that would help. When he did, he went from feeling anxious, worried, and disconnected to feeling loved, centered, and calm. Starting with personal development, then moving towards spirituality, he found the thought leaders that helped to give him the exact message he needed at the time. There's no right or wrong here. Just keep moving forward. Stay open to what feels right, and know that by taking a step, the next step will reveal itself. If you haven't taken it yet, be sure to take the post-betrayal syndrome quiz, which you can find at thepbtinstitute.com/quiz. And like the show, subscribe, rate, review, and tell your friends about it. Thanks for listening. Can't wait to be with you next time, and here's to your breakthrough.